Hi everyone, welcome to
Mimosa Talks.
Hi everyone, welcome to Mimosa Talks. Today is going to be episode 2. We're going to be talking about what's your flavor.
So this episode is pretty exciting because our sexuality and how we identify ourselves is part of our journey. There's nothing more meaningful than knowing who we are and what we like, what turns us on and off, and of course, knowing all this will facilitate the relationship we have with our partners.
We're really in a new time space right now where everyone is identifying differently and people feel free to kind of identify as what they want to identify as, and there seems to be like less restriction on who you can be.
It's important to know the difference between biological sex, gender expression, gender identity, and gender orientation. They're all very different, and there's this new also term that they use in medical records that is SOGI, which is sexual orientation and gender identity. And we need to understand that is different. Biological sex is the sex that we were assigned at birth. Biological sex exists on a spectrum, and it depends on our sex chromosomes. We also need to be aware that some missing genes or alterations on genes can make someone appear as female with male chromosomes. Intersex is a body. Our body do not fit into the standard definition of male or female. Gender expression is also how a person identifies and presents to the world. And gender identity is how with which gender we identified ourselves. Not necessarily we were born with it. We just, through our journey, have realized that this is the gender we want to identify with. And the gender orientation would be the gender or genders an individual is sexually attracted romantically or sexually. And there's also people that is asexual or aromantic, which is ace is called to asexual and aro is called to aromantic. So those, and there's so many other terms, right, that we need to learn and keep updated because like everything changes. The world changes every day.
My 13-year-old son was talking to me about someone, and I had to stop him. I was like, wait, I thought you were talking about one person. Why you say they, them? And he's like, oh, I'm sorry. And then I remember, of course, his best friend is non-binary, so he is used to talking to him, her, that way. And it's interesting because all the kids are actually really experimenting with how they identify. They kind of try it on. At first he identified as homosexual, and then he decided he was more non-binary, and it seems to be sticking, so that's where he's comfortable. Just it's interesting. I have another friend whose daughter is now his son. It's like she went from a girl to a boy, and it's all, they're all so much, like, there's so much freedom. Like, we used to, girls, okay, the choices were like, are you straight or are you gay, basically, or bi, but that was it. Now it's rainbows.
Yeah, and I think that when you're a kid, I feel like when I grew up, I'm 26, so I feel like this wasn't happening when I was a kid, but it's happening so much more now. But you didn't have to come out to anyone if you were straight. There is no coming out if you're straight, but I'm always curious as to why everyone else has to come out. And I feel like we're inching closer to a society that doesn't feel like they have to come out. Like, we're allowing a lot more fluidity, and just to allow people to kind of change how they want to present themselves in the world.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting thing, that there is more freedom in on the concept of what is being in love and sexuality, and that's kind of what this whole podcast is about. There are no rules. There are certain things that you need to know about yourself, but as a whole, there are no rules, and that's basically, I feel like, this new generation is doing. They're breaking all the rules and they're making their own, and it's really awesome to see, honestly.
Definitely. And the most important thing is also that we need to be aware that the only way we're going to get to know who we are and what we like is by experimenting. We need to not necessarily meet a lot of new people and like go out there and have sex. And no, it's not that. It's you can even experiment it in a safe way with someone you know, someone you trust. Communication is very important. So now that everything is so open, then that gives us opportunity for us to feel more comfortable and communicate to friends, family, or boyfriend. Hey, I like this, I don't like this, or let's try this new. And it's part of our journey. So we need to be open and accept ourselves so others accept us.
Yeah, it's part of the mindfulness. I feel like mindfulness has really taken over in the world, even as it's in now. Everybody understands it and actually uses it without necessarily knowing what they're doing. But mindful communication is exactly that, is being able to communicate your own needs and also understand what the other person is hearing and understanding, and where they can meet you halfway or not. I do feel like mindfulness is super important in sexuality and relationships in general, but mostly sexuality and what you are willing to experiment with. You really need to be a good communicator and be mindful of the other person. You can't just throw stuff at them and not understand where their hang-ups might be, or it's how do you call it? It's a conversation. It's a conversation between two people, and so it's a lot of give and take to experiment.
Put attention to those little things. Like sometimes whenever we're watching a movie, media tell us like, oh, we're attracted how this person looks, and sexually I'm attracted to this person, but you know, I wouldn't have no attraction with this girl. I'm more romantically attracted to a guy. So that's valid. You can be attracted to someone sexually, but not necessarily romantically. Like on myself, I'm sexually attracted to girls and boys. That doesn't mean that I'm romantically attracted to girls. I'm only romantically attracted to guys. And that's how did I discover it? Just putting myself out there, putting attention to the little things.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because you mentioned something about media, Fabi, and how you can just kind of pay attention to how you feel, maybe when watching a movie or when, you know, exploring media. I have a cousin he's much older now. He's fully gay. But when he was younger, he would watch Titanic, and he really loved Titanic. He would watch it like day and night. And he would tell his mom, like, Mom, I don't know, but like whenever I watch Titanic, like my pee-pee gets tingly. And so he just like, you know, he loved Titanic. But then as he got older into his teenage years, he would watch porn, and he didn't know, like, you know, the guy on girl porn is just not doing it for me. And then he was like curious about watching just some guy on guy porn. And so when he watched guy on guy porn, he was like, oh my God, it's like Titanic. So definitely just being curious about it and kind of just exploring the different things that you might be interested in without judgment. Because a lot of kids, I feel like I wish I had this podcast when I was a teenager, because I definitely subscribed to the girl on guy and I didn't know how to be curious.
Same here. Like I'm older, but same. I never even thought of it, which is ironic because in my family it was a rainbow, and so it wasn't like I wasn't aware of it. It's just I never even conceptualized it. But you're right. Like the media and porn there's good and bad about it, but I think there's a lot of good in knowing what's out there, and also, again, knowing how you react. But I knew a gay couple who loves watching lesbian porn, so there's also no rules. People are so different, and that is the beauty of it. That's why I do love the rainbow imagery, because there's all these colors, and we can add more if we wanted to.
In this article by Gabb, the relationship work of sexual intimacy in long-term heterosexual and LGBTQ partnerships, they mentioned that many of the LGBTQ couples identify the exploration of sexual fantasies as a core to the success of their partnership. So they are pretty free. They don't put any boundaries of like, this is good or bad. Whatever works for their relationship, that is okay, and that's what they consider that is healthy.
Yeah, and in the article that I found, they're talking about all the benefits of non-monogamous relationships, and one of the things that keep coming up is that people felt like they could grow as an individual within those relationships. Another interesting point in it is that you expect, I think a lot of more normal monogamous couples, we always have, you know, this fear of cheating or whatever, and when they did some research, the numbers show that actually there is less cheating in non-monogamous relationship. Why? Because they're open about it. It's not cheating if the other person knows, and it's the boundaries have been talked about and everybody's comfortable with what they're doing. And so that's another thing that I thought was interesting, and the happiness within these couples and the longevity was very strong as well.
So I feel like we're talking a lot about very advanced kind of dating relationships, and maybe for people who are very clear with who they are. But I'm curious to know what both of you, what your experience was as teenagers, maybe coming out of high school, kind of figuring out yourself, like your 19, 20, 21-year-old self. What was that year? What were those years like for you? Considering that at that point, a lot of people are figuring out what they like, what they don't like, and they're experimenting. And sometimes it can be kind of traumatic. You can have kind of some bad experiences. And I feel like at that point, you are determining, oh, that's a hard no, that's a hard pass, you know? So I'm curious to know what both of your experiences were like at that point.
I feel like since we've talked and we've done all these podcasts, you ladies have it way more together. Like if I think about those years, 20 years ago, I feel like I was living in a cloud. Now, I don't know if it's because of my whole childhood and it's just my personal experience, but I feel like I went from long relationships to long relationships, and it was always kind of, I accepted a lot because for some reason I thought that's what I had to do. I didn't have any traumatic experience. It was always just not what I wanted at the end. I had the experience like so many times. I would wake up and be like, what am I doing here? Like waking up from like a weird dream. And I think I've lived a lot of my life like that, where it's like a little bit in a blur. Now I'm like much more conscious and in the moment and present, because I realize that's how you learn to. And that's also part of the self-awareness journey, like checking in with yourself. How are you feeling about this? Which is what you're asking. What did you feel? Well, I didn't, because I wasn't really checking. I was just surviving. I was always on survival mode. So how about you, Fabi?
My sexuality started from very young. I had girlfriends and I thought they were pretty. I thought they physically looked pretty. I never was attracted to their personality as like, ooh, I want to grow with this person, or I want to go on a date with this person, or I want to know how they think. I was not interested to connect in that way with girls. I thought they were sexy, and that's it. And then with boys, I feel something different. I feel shy. I felt like there was something more special and meaningful that I wanted to just save for myself. Sometimes I was more nervous around guys. So that's how I knew that I was attracted in a different way to guys than with girls. Basically, with girls, I would like just feel like I want to just be intimate with them right away, and I don't want to know them more. And then with guys, I will just get nervous. That's the summary of it. Yeah.
It's so interesting. You're making me realize, because I have a friend who was telling me the same thing and I couldn't quite understand, and now the way you put it into words, I'm like, oh, totally get it.
It's important to also know that some cultures save sex until marriage, and that's okay too, right? We need to be respectful of all cultures, and all parts of the world we see sex as very different, and whatever goes with you, that's okay too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also reminding your kids that it's okay to, you know, feel excited and want to explore these things, but maybe, like you said, it's not age appropriate, it's not the time yet, and making sure that like we don't shame them about what they're enjoying, because like you said, it's natural, it's going to come eventually. Maybe we want to keep our kids like younger, and we want them to kind of like not grow up so fast. So I know myself, I had sex when I was 14, and I didn't talk to anyone about like what sex was, what to expect, or anything like that. So all I knew was what I saw from media. And so going into that sexual experience, I also didn't have like much of expectations. I didn't have any type of like boundaries that I had set for myself. I didn't have anything that I felt like, I always felt with my first boyfriend, even my second boyfriend, even my third boyfriend, was that if my partner has a boner, if they have a hard, I have to do something. Like, and so it didn't matter if I was like sexually ready, in the mood, like with the energy. It was just like, oh, and it was something that was so subconscious that I didn't realize that I was doing it. But I realized when I heard a podcast that she said, everyone's erection is their own erection. It's not up to you to kind of like handle it or to manage it or to please them. If you choose to kind of go further when someone is erect or when they're, fully like ready, like that's up to you, but it's not your like obligation.
There was an article that talked about that, and about the fact that it was in an interpersonal relationship in the book, where they talk about the token resistance, and that's one of the things that seems to be normal. However, what if you just change your mind? And what if that doesn't mean you don't want to do it with that person, but maybe at that particular moment you don't. And why would you sacrifice your own, choices for the other person? Because that is kind of like the narrative. I think a lot of women feel that way. I don't know about men. It would be interesting to know in homosexual relationships if they feel the same.
Going back to this article by Gabb, he mentions that successful sexual intimacy was accomplished through a threefold combination of factors, which is self-awareness, couples' depth of knowledge of each other and their partnership. So self-knowledge, masturbation is very important. If you want to know your body and what you like, you need to masturbate yourself. There's toys, there's hands, there's so many things that you can imagine, whatever goes. But yeah, self-awareness of what you like is very important.
It is, and I think toys now are so like readily available, and they do allow for exploration in different ways than a hand could. But it's I think it's really interesting because now it's more normal too. When I worked with these ladies, they all were talking about their box of sex toys. And I remember I was like, I don't even own a sex toy. Maybe I should. And you should. You really definitely should.
There are many out there, and there's one for everybody. Literally everybody. If I know some people don't like as much penetration, some people like a lot of penetration, some people want more like clitoral stimulation, and for some people those like vibrators, they might just be too much. So I guess it's just going back to being curious about like, okay, let me be curious about this and not think of it as like a chore, or like not think of it as like an assignment, but rather just be curious with it, be with your body, and kind of allow it to be like one of those self-care moments. You sit down and you can do your nails for 40 minutes. You have to wait for them to dry. You can't wash dishes or do anything. That takes up a lot of time. So why not kind of just like also look at like masturbation in that way, where you're like, okay, I'm gonna maybe clean my room, set the scene, maybe play some music, light a few candles if you want. It doesn't have to be like that. Some people just want to do it quick and fast. So just like understanding what gets you in the mood to do it.
That's part of the self-awareness, right?
Just because we're talking about about exploring and kind of figuring out who you are and what you like, and self-awareness and everything in that nature. But I do think that there is like a certain point in a person's life. Maybe I'm thinking about my little sister, and I'm also thinking about my past self, my younger self. Just that no one really had these conversations with me, and I thought I knew who I was, and I thought that I was very confident in certain experiences. But even in those experiences, when you feel confident and you feel sure and you feel like you know who you are, you can still be hurt. And so it does go back to kind of like knowing what your body wants, and knowing and being able to say no to people.
The boundaries, again, you're going to learn with the mistakes sometimes. And even within couples that want to experiment, you're going to be like talking through experience you want to do together, and then you do them, and then maybe one of you is not comfortable afterwards. And part of being in a partnership is you can be like, something bothered me, I'll figure it out, and then you can be like, this is what bothered me, so maybe next time we'll do this. And that's really where, if you're heard, it's a little bit different. Now in this, like, I didn't grow up with Tinder. I had one night stands, and usually I found them to be sometimes fun, but also, like, if I have a toy, I always prefer that. But I think the Tinder thing that always confounds me is, like, I don't know if I want to sleep with someone because of a picture. There's a vibe, there's an energy that you have to feel from the other person. And even when I went on Bumble, what would happen a lot of time, because I went on a few dates, it was like, I would go on these dates with these guys that were great, on paper, we were talking, they were very interesting people, they were good looking, but then I would see them and there was nothing. No chemistry. I was just like, nope.
If I matched with someone and we talked, it was cool. I also needed to hear their voice, because I feel like for me, voices have been a really big kind of predictor of, like, my attraction. And so if I maybe liked someone and they liked me and we kind of exchanged those messages, and then after a while I was like, hey, you want to talk on the phone? And then when I heard their voice and it was like just really squeaky or really high or just not what I expected, I was like, it's okay.
You know what is funny? I heard about this study that depending on your cycle, on wherever you are in your cycle, you're attracted to different tones of voice, and you also sound different. So it's just funny that we just change according to our physiology as well.
Yeah, but it's interesting because I do think you can feel a vibe more on the phone. Ideally, video call, because then you see the person's expressions and how they move their faces, and then you hear their voice, and that's great.
Also, you get to see if they're real or not real.
That's another thing. And that's another thing that is always very strange about those dating apps.
But one thing I want to talk about also is this article. It's called It's Its Own Thing, a Typology of Interpersonal Relationship Scripts. So this article, the title doesn't really give much detail into what the article is actually about, but it's this author, Scull, and he's kind of talking about sugar relationships and arguing that they're not necessarily prostitution or necessarily like sex work all the time. A lot of data has shown that sugar relationships are prostitution, but really there's just so many things that go into being a sugar baby. So the CEO of Sugar website from Seeking Arrangements, he defines sugaring as an arrangement where one person provides intimacy, companionship, or other forms of attention in exchange for personal benefit. This could be financial support, professional advancements, and other things as well. But I thought it was really interesting because sex has been kind of in the scene as a job for a very, very long time. And a lot of people kind of talk down about sex work and they stigmatize it. But I kind of want to have a conversation where we're not stigmatizing it, but rather being more open and curious about it. They were talking about it in 1680s in Japan and how women were called, I'm going to butcher this name, odoriko. And I guess they were paid to dance and entertain samurais. And so that was kind of one of those introductions to sex. And they were not necessarily having sex with samurais, but they were entertaining them. And it was sexual in nature. And that was a precursor to the geishas in the 1750s, who were unmarried, very stylish women. And they entertained by singing and dancing and playing music. But there was hardly any commercial sex, meaning that if there was sex, it was behind the scenes and not so much kind of advertised as like this is something that you get for being a part of the show.
That's interesting. I actually thought that geishas were prostitutes, like high-end prostitutes. I think it's the oldest job in the world, right?
Yeah.
It has a purpose. It has I don't think it should be illegal. I think it should be legal so that also the people that are sex workers are protected, and they should be protected because they're putting themselves kind of on the line of fire, really, sometimes. And so, yeah, I'm all for it.
This article was actually saying why 6 reasons why sugaring is distinct and separate from prostitution. They were talking about how not all sugar relationships involve sex. Sometimes it can be merely just for companionship. Sometimes someone might be looking for a mentor. It could be just for travel, or because someone likes to have someone there to kind of like spoil. Another reason was that a lot of the relationships, they involved interpersonal scripts. So it's more based on like friendship, companionship, and sometimes even love. It's not like a job where you get in, you get out, and that's it. It's a job where you build a relationship and you kind of develop a liking for the person. They're actually really selective with who they choose to be with and who they choose to spend their time with. So that was something also that the article was talking about. And aside from paying for sex, there's other compensations such as spa treatments, paid bills, travels, and also like clothing. You know, people are dating just for fun, but I feel like when you're kind of sugaring, it's more of like a job where it's like kind of going to a formal interview where you really have to show your best self. And you have to kind of sell yourself in that way to be like, listen, this is what I bring. This is who I am. I know I'm young. I know I may not be like as established in my career, but like I offer really good attention. Like I offer really good listening skills, or whatever it is that you have to bank on like what they're needing. And so you have to be able to kind of adjust yourself to each person. You're like a snowflake constantly changing.